Hey guys, and welcome to Pheas Airsoft, where today I'm going to fit this Gate Titan Advance in this KWA T10. So a quick note on safety: if I'm unboxing, shooting down range, doing disassemblies, I always make sure I'm nice and safe. So I've always got eye protection on just in case something happens. Make sure mags are out and empty, and obviously unless I'm doing the shooting. Obviously that's using chrono, and make sure that there's no ammunition left in anything as well, so make sure you're doing the same. Hi guys, and welcome back. If you do enjoy this content or find it useful today, please do like and subscribe because you're going to be really helping me out. So I've got here a T10, or the lower half of a T10, from one of my subscribers that contacted me and asked me if I could drop one in. Unfortunately, he's only sent the lower half, so I couldn't do an unboxing. I also tried to put my upper from my Ronin Recon on it, which it fit, but I think my hot rubber must be damaged or torn because it just didn't feed right, although I know the magazine fed perfectly with the recent T6 that we did. So I think it's my hot rubber at fault, and I don't have a spare at the minute. So we're going to see what kind of results come out of this. Obviously we've seen before that it's a lot snappier, but I wanted to show the specific T10 setup. It is virtually identical to the TK45 recoil version, but obviously people ask for the specific model that they've got. So we've already got rid of the upper receiver. We've also got rid of the charging handle assembly. So all we've got left is obviously just the rest of this to disassemble. So we'll make a start and we'll get rid of the mag release first, just because that's relatively easy. And for that, we're going to use the my precision screwdriver set. So I'm looking at fairly small torques for that. Not that small apparently. Go. So it looks like it's a T6. Put that whole assembly together so I don't lose any parts, and I'll even drop that out just so I know that's a T6 for later. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my flat head on here. I'm going to need my armorer's wrench shortly as well. I'm going to release this base plate, just being careful not to let it sort of go anywhere. Now I believe I've seen a couple of pictures online. Somebody said that the new version of this base plate doesn't have a slot in it for a screwdriver. But the holes are still there, so they've had to use needle nose pliers. So if you do end up with a new one and you're doing this and there's no slot down here for a flathead, then obviously do consider using needle nose pliers to get in there and untwist it. It's not massively tight in there at all. So there's the recoil weight and the return spring. There's our standard spring removed. Next then, that's a non-linear spring. I'm not sure why a non-linear spring's in there. It should be a linear spring, but I can resolve that separately. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the cover off here. Now there are a couple of screws already taken out, so we're going to take the other ones out. So they're just tiny little Phillips heads. Now what I will say with this setup is, with any recoil, I've had it a few times with my Ronin Recon, it is worth checking these screws on a regular basis, because that recoil will literally rattle them out, and if you lose them, obviously it's not very easy to replace them. So do be careful and make sure that you're checking the tightness of these, even every game day if you have to, just to make sure that you're not losing any screws, and if they get trapped in there, they can sort of warp and misshape the track under there. Get that out of the way. That's looking good. In a minute we're going to separate these out, but before then we're going to take the pistol grip off. So for this I'm using a 2.0 Allen key or hex head. That lifts that right out. And then I think I'm back to the Torx 6 again. Yes, I am. Torx 6 again, a little screw on the back. Get those together out of the way. There comes the base plate. Now, bizarrely in the T6, this little circuit wasn't on the T6 that we had to fit, but it's on this one, but we will be removing that towards the end of the installation. Just get those out of the way. So at the minute, the red wire comes up, red and black wire come up the front, as they will at the end, and the red terminal was at the back. That'll change. Next we've got the usual pistol grip, screws in there, 2 Phillips heads. The worst part of the install in these is having to solder the Deans back on afterwards. And those that know me will attest to the fact that I absolutely hate soldering. I can't even tell you why. It's not even like I'm terrible at it. I just really dislike doing it. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to loosen off this screw in here, but I need a bigger part. I do. Let's go. That's too big. So that's a 2.5 I've got in there. I believe a Torx 10 would have also done in there. There's the screw. Now be careful, that little screw that comes out of the back of this sling plate here has got a little washer on it, and I'll remove that in a minute. So I'm just going to grab my little snips and I'm going to grab my armourer's wrench as well to remove those. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to separate these wires out, just because it makes it easy. But what I'm going to do is keep these as intact as possible, just for sort of longevity reasons. If somebody wanted to, the owner wanted to put it back or anything, then he could do if he so chose. So all I'm doing here is there's some heat shrink over a mini spade connector. So I'm just going to strip that back and separate that. I'm going to do the same on the other side. This way then I'm not permanently damaging anything. It's all fully reversible at a later stage. Go. And that one looked like it was it's sort of like partially stuck to it a little bit. Never mind. Right, separate those two. So that's the original end stock wiring loom out of the way, and we're going to undo this nut on the back here, which is remarkably well on. There we go. So just use my sort of armourer's wrench, my star one. I've had it absolutely years, and I'm just going to loosen it off. I'm going to get that out of the way. Now there is a part of this ring, I believe, where there's a little bit better spacing to remove the wiring through there. So I'm just going to get those ready to pull through. Doesn't matter if this outer shrouding gets damaged, because obviously if they ever do put the original wiring back in place, then you can obviously easily reshroud that. I'm now going to knock this trigger pin out. Looks like it's going to come out to the left. Go off camera to do that. So there's a trigger pin. It actually went out the other way and it came out. The teeth were on the left hand side. So all we've got left is the rear body pin, which sometimes some people have said they've had to pull on it a little bit further just to get it out of the way properly to release. And as we pull this out, this there we go, bolt release will come out. I'm just pulling the connectors through. They're going to be a little bit snug. I'm just going to see if I can find that little bit of the ring that lets it go a bit freer. There we go. So they're now free of that. The body can go out of the way for now. We'll separate a little bit of this out. I'm going to bring the camera down so we can see what happens inside the gearbox. So we've come down now, we're going to get ourselves into the gearbox. My intention is that I'm going to show you back to, obviously, the reassembly point so you can see what it looks like. Make sure that you keep each of these little screws with its little washer so that you don't have mysterious washers appearing out of nowhere. So you've got 4 across the top. There's a washer still. And then you got the 1, 2, 3, 4 bigger ones across the bottom. So there's one. There's 2. Move the KWA sticker. Oh, and that came apart entirely easily. So that's done most of the work for us. So that's separated nice and easily. So I'm just going to lift out the cylinder assembly. There's our air nozzle and our cylinder assembly. There's our sector gear. There's our other 2 gears. There's one of our washers from up there. I'll take the cut-off lever out. Right, so the next stage is I'm just going to pop the trigger out. On this one, we're not replacing the trigger. The original trigger is going to go back in. We've got this little cut-off physical block for the safety to remove. And that's not going back in at all. So I'm going to add that to our little pile of spares. Over there. This trigger block is also coming out. So there's 1 screw there. Just to show you, just above the contacts there. There's 1 down at the bottom here. And then that will lift up and out of the way, and the screws can even go as well. We don't need those. Get that out of the way. And a little spring. Next part to get rid of is the cut-off, the single shot, because the Titan's going to do that for us because it's a optical based sensor, so it'll see the gear spinning round and stop it when it's time. With that, this little spring here needs to come out because we don't need this spring anymore. There we go. Now, those of you that are eagle-eyed will have noticed I did move that shim there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift it because it's going to continue to move about. I'm just going to lift it out. I'm going to put it back on the bottom of the sector gear where it's come from so that I know it's in a safe place. There we go. So that's safely on there. Now, I'm going to take out the selector plate and I'm going to clean off the selector plate around this area. We're going to file down the corner of the gearbox and just generally clean around in here a little bit. So I've got that nice and clean and dry, or as oil free as I can possibly get it. And we want this, particularly this corner here, to be nice and clean. And then just going to sort the inside of the gearbox, making sure that no grease can get onto the optics, or at least not easily get onto the optics. I'm also going to check the gear as well, the sector gear, because the sector gear is what it's reading. Now those are more than clean enough and adequate. There's the bearing. Put that back on. There we go. So, next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to get my files out. I'm going to file down that corner so that it doesn't damage our so it doesn't rip our sticker off that the optic needs. What I've discovered on the last few of these installs that I've done is that it is worth just calibrating the selector before you start running it, particularly if you've got, obviously that's easy to do if you've got the advanced edition, because you've got the USB link to put it onto your computer or your Android phone. I believe the Android version's in development as well. Not Android, the Apple version, sorry. So I have an Android and it makes it easy. So I'm just going to literally just looking to round this corner off here and right into this corner down here as well. Let's see if we can get there we go. So I'm just looking to round it off, because otherwise all that happens is it's pretty sharp and it just rips your sticker off and it stops the whole system working. And what I'm going to do is just make sure that I clean out all of the metal dust that I might have produced, to make sure that we don't get any into the system. We don't want it causing any issues for the Titan. Although from what the punishment I've seen people put them through, they seem to be fairly robust pieces of kit to the Titan. Interestingly, the Jeftron one where they set it on fire and it still works afterwards is comical and interesting. So there we've got the installation kit. So we'll get those bits out, and we mostly need the M2 mounting set and the stickers. The rest for now, the connector we will need to solder a new connector on at the end, so we'll keep that out for a second. We've also got the chip itself. So there's our Titan, put that to one side as well. First thing we're going to do is, the installation manual recommends, if you can, use the middle sticker. So we're just going to peel one off, and we're looking to line it up with that bottom corner. So pretty nicely got that lined up now, right there. So that should be easy to read for the sensors. And I'm going to put this back in place, and just going to double check that it's not too oily on there. It's not. I will wipe it down a little bit. There we go. And the selector can go back in place now, under there and into there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to check that that slides and it's not been torn, and it's not. It's nicely just going in and out. You should be able to see there that it's not tearing or anything. It's not scratching at the edge. So we're happy with that. That's a good result all round. Perfect. So now we can mount the Titan itself. So the first stage I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift the top board off and get the wiring out of the way. And at this stage, before I screw it down, I think, in fact no, we'll screw it down first and then we'll go for the wiring. So I'm just going to drop it down, and we screw it down using where the white hole is there. That is indicating the mounting point that you have to use. And if you don't use that mounting point, you're going to break something. So I've got the M2 set, and I've found with this that you only need to use one of the silver little washers that come with it, but you do need to use the insulating washer as well. So I'll just get that out, because that's stayed in there. Now this is a change of material for this. So there is the little insulating washer that has to go on the bottom. Then we can add our spacing ones on top, and then we can put our screw through. If you put the silver one straight down, you run the risk of damaging and shorting out your Titan. So I'm just going to use that. I'm going to carefully hold this together until I get it down. And then I'm going to hold the board roughly in the position it should be in. Now you might need to put a bit of pressure on just to get it started. Please do not over tighten it. If you over tighten it, you're going to break your board. So that's firm but not tight. It's not moving. There's a tiny bit of movement. So I'm just going to nip it a little bit more, but I've not got any massive play in it, and I'm not going to damage the board. So it should roughly sit, so you've got the tiniest little gap around here, and obviously clear of the gear around here. It's got a little bit of dirt on it there. There we go, clean that off. So the next thing I can do is run the wiring through the tracks. This is definitely more nerve-wracking the first time you do it, but it's not as bad as people think it is. That said, obviously, I obviously do loads of these, so I would say that. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to get a Torx. So this is just a little tiny Torx head. This one is a Torx 9. And the flat end is just going to be very useful because it's not sharp in any way, shape or form. Useful to just laying these wires down in these tracks and helping me position them well. So the board is moving a little bit. I'm going to have to tighten that back down. So I'm just going to run the wire that runs out to the stock first, down like this. And as I'm going, I'm just going to use the end of the screwdriver to just lay it flat and get it squared in there. That can come this side of that. We'll push it into there. Now the wires are quite firm material, but they are flexible and they will go where you want them to go quite happily. Next one I'm going to do is I'm going to do this little thin wire here. That's like a control wire to sort of deliver the needed power to the chip to power it up. And what I'm going to do is just like with the T6, I'm going to push it, get that in there. There we go. So what I've done there is this thin wire comes round, it's going to go under this this sort of other wire in a minute, and I'm making sure I'm pushing it down to make sure it stays out of the way of the motor, just like the other wire there, because if they're in the way of the motor's just going to chew through it and it's going to short you tighten out. You might be able to solder new wiring onto it. Likelihood is you're not. You've ruined your tighten and you've lost 80 to 130 pound depending on the model that you've got. The other place to watch out for is this corner here. Make sure the wire is down off the corner so it doesn't get pinched and nipped when you're closing the gearbox. But that now is in there quite satisfyingly. I'm going to tighten that screw up just a tad. Just because I think there's a touch too much movement in there. Now that that's all in then, we can reassemble. But what I will do before I reassemble, the first thing I'm going to check is, first of all, I'm going to drop the sector gear back in place and I'm going to put the top chip back on. And I'm going to make sure that it's not contacting it. So that's spinning freely, it's not contacting that, which is good. I'm going to take it out of the way. I'm going to drop the trigger in. You can do this part if you need to without the spring on the trigger. So I've put the trigger in just to show you that's how it sits on the trigger like that. I'm going to drop that in. And this is a good indicator of, obviously, if things are looking nice and neat and they're going to fit, this is what's, if there's going to be any catching. Famous last words because I'm not going to get this back in. So I can see that that's got that in there now. That's nicely sat in there. I'm just going to drop this top board back on again just to check. That's not touching any components. That's a good sign. So I'm going to finish rebuilding the rest of these components. So I've got a shim slightly out of place there. Sorted that. That's dropped in perfect. I'm going to drop the sector gear in. Perfect. What I'm going to do for the cylinder assembly is make sure that the teeth of the sector gear are underneath. And I'm going to get this little spring and I'm going to angle it towards this little pin here. I'm just going to push that back, lock that in place, and that's secure. So now that the part's in, if you do find that you've got this little square bolt nut hanging about, it just sits in the back of the gearbox there. There's a slot for it at the back. We'll put the anti-reversal latch in. and I'm just going to hold it. I'm going to push it open, and then with enough pressure from my finger, I should be able to keep it latched open while I drop in the gear, which I'm making a mockery of. There we go. So that's in there now. Happy with that. So there's only the top chip to go back in, and then we can reassemble everything happily. So I'm just going to drop that in, make sure all the pins line up in all the correct places. Push that down. And then I've made sure that the piston is lined up on its tracks there, and then this should drop quite easily and nicely over the top. You might need to just, there we go, push a little bit, and I think there we go. It's nicely sat together. We've got a nice flush finish all the way around, apart from there, it says. Oh, there we go, done. Job's a good one. So I'm just going to test. The trigger's not catching. They're not catching. That's fine. So now we can put the screws back in. Make sure that you put the little washers on each of the screws as they're going in, because they need to be on there to help keeping it tension down. If you don't know the little trick, when you put a screw in, if it's going into threads, turn it backwards negative a little bit, and you should get like a click, and that means that the threads are just starting, they'll click back into position on the correct threading, so you're not trying to cut new threads and potentially bugger the screw and the screw hole. So just twist it backwards a little bit, as though you're going to remove the screw. Let's see if we can get that to click. There we go, that click there, and then in we go. Gearbox is back together now, so we're going to have to do the bit that pains me the most about a recoil install. I'm going to have to cut the Dean's connector off to get it back in the box. So what I'm going to do is cut it off so that I've got a clear indication which is red and which is black. I'm just going to check that they're not moving, because if they are moving, I'm going to push them right down, but they're absolutely fine. I'm going to take that out of the way, and I'm going to replace that with a fresh, brand new one. You could, in theory, use that same one again if you wanted to. So I'm going to lift this into place, and a couple of things all sort of have to happen simultaneously here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to feed these wires down the stock. What I'm looking for first, no, there used to be, I may be confusing it with TM, but there used to be like a little part of the ring down here that where the threads were sort of not there, just to make it easier to get the wires back through, but I may just be mistaking that with TM. So what I'm trying to do is keep the wires in the same orientation. So I'm trying to keep red on the right and black on the left, just because it's going to make life a little bit easier later on. And they are feeding through. Got stuck. That part, and that part, and that part. So those are fed in now, and I'm just going to gently, as you can see, they're there. There you go. It is fiddly, and trying to do this on camera floating it is obviously equally difficult. Just going to move that down there. So I'm just going to feed those in a little bit. There we go. Now as I move this back, I'm just going to get the motor wires down the gap for the pistol grip. I'm going to feed that one in there as well. There we go. And then I'm just going to gently work it back. these wires are going to delicately sort of get fed back as well. Careful not to nick them, scrape them. You don't want the obviously the wires inside exposed. And what I'm going to do is, as I approach the selector here, we've got these three little shapes on here. So you've got safe, semi and auto. And what I'm going to do is make sure that it stays set in a safe setting. Whilst I drop it back, I'm just going to gently pull on those. This is a little bit of a faff, and it is literally just a case of trial and experiment. There you go, and eventually it will just drop in place. Now before I lock the gearbox down, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift the front up ever so slightly so I can lift that into place, and I've noticed a little tiny spring has come off from under there. So there is a little tiny spring under there. And I'm not gonna lie, a lot of this is just fiddly little bits. The selector's jumped a little bit, so I'm just gonna lift that back up a tad, push that back to safe, and then I can safely lock that in place. And we've got our bolt release, the rear pin is in. Next stage for me now is to get the trigger pin in and lock that down. So I'm just gonna take this off camera while I tap it in. Pin's now in, keeping that locked secure. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the screw back in to the stop plate here. The sling plate, even not stop plate, sling plate. Making sure I put the little washer on it. I was right earlier, you can use a T10 on that. I'm just going to tighten that down. Next thing I'm going to do, keeping these down, I'm going to tighten down the nut on the stock tube, making sure that I get it level. There we go. Because otherwise it goes on wonky and you might damage your thread. So I'm going to tighten that by hand first. Now if you don't have an armorer's wrench, you could in theory use adjustable grips, but you are going to damage this massively aesthetically. So if you can get an armorer's wrench, it's worth it. So I'm just going to take this off and tighten this down. And I will tighten this again before I've fully finished it. I've got that as tight as it'll go. So we've now got our wiring running down the stock. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to screw this down just yet. I'm going to wait until I've soldered on the new connector at the end there, just because it's worth leaving that extra bit of wire for whilst you're messing with the soldering. Next thing I am going to do though is we can put in the spring, the weight, and the weight spring, wobble them into place, and the plate on the end can come in. Now most of that you can finger tighten down, and it's just at the end you'll need your needle nose if you've not got the slot on the end, or if you have, just tighten it down with that. There we go, it's coming together quite nicely now. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my needle nose pliers, and I'm just going to bend the connectors to connect back onto the motor. So what I'm going to do is, if I show you the connector, as you can see there's like a flat edge and then there's a curled in edge. The curled in edge is what's going to go over and down. So I'll show you now. I'm just going to grab it lightly, not putting any force other than on the top bit there just to bend it. So as you can see now, it's now bent to a 90-degree-ish angle, and there's the clip, and I'm going to do the same with the other side. What I'm also going to do is at this stage now, I want to remove the little arcing chip. Add that to the list of spares, And then what I'm going to do before I put the pistol grip on is I'm going to check that the connectors sit snugly but moderately easy to get on. So all I'm going to do is put the red on the red. Will it go on moderately easily? It's needing some force to get that on there, so just going to push that on a couple of times just to, there we go, that's better. I'm going to do the same with the black terminal. There we go. The next thing then, I'll put the pistol grip back on. So the black wire is going to come in the front middle hole. The red wire is going to come in the back. It can be fiddly to get those in. So there's one tightened in. There's the other one. There we go. Work back and find that. Pistol grip's in now. So the red contact wire is going to come forward, keeping it out of the way of the motor hole, which is easier said than done, and then up the front of the pistol grip. The black is obviously going to come up the front as well. I'm going to drop the motor in. We want the red contact at the front. Checking that it moves okay. The red's going to go into its contact. I find with the red one it's easier if you push the motor down as well, because it gives you a little bit more cable to work with to get the cable over. The black, it's got a little bit excess cabling, so I'm just going to push that down. There, and that will just fold down into this gap down here. And then the base plate can go on now. What I did there was just made sure that there was routed round and round, because it's got these little separators in that are going to push your wires out the way a little bit, and I'm making sure it's not caught, so it should just freely just drop into place like that. First one I'm going to put in place is the back one, because that's usually the trickiest one to get in. And just to get that started, there we go. And then I'm going to bring the other screw in, which I need the 0.2 for, at 2.0. Tighten that down, that's the pistol grip on. So all that's left now, obviously we're checking there that we've got full, semi and auto. So all that's left now is to solder the connectors on. So I'll come back in a second once I've done that. We'll do the final little bit and check it works. So I've soldered that on now, and it took me about 20 minutes of messing about. I absolutely hate with a passion soldering, and might have mentioned that before, maybe once, maybe twice, maybe I've just kept it quiet, but really dislike soldering, and you know, people that send me stuff that needs soldering, I really don't like it, please stop. But never mind, I got there in the end. So all we're going to do now is we're just going to put these screws back in to keep this little plate down on the back, to keep our stock adjustment happening. That's far too big a screwdriver. There we go, need the middle one. There was a screw already missing from this, which I'll let the owner know. So tighten these down, make sure they're good and tight, just because they do wiggle loose over time, and obviously make sure. So what I also did is, once the connector was on and it cooled down, because obviously soldering is hot, I put the USB link on. Unfortunately I can't show you because the USB link runs on my phone, on the app, and I also record on my phone. But I connected it up, and what I did is I went directly to the sensors setting, and all I was checking for is that it detected that the selector was moving, which it did, and I recalibrated it before I've even fired a shot, just to make sure that it's definitely picking up the correct settings. I also checked that it could detect the trigger pulling in case I wanted to mess with the sensitivity, and then I also made sure that it could see the tooth, which is what it should be able to see, obviously based on where we set the sector gear. So I made sure that was all set and happy. So now what we can do is the inaugural trigger pull. So I'll plonk that on there. So it's just a 7.4 volt battery, wired to Dean's, and safe, should be nothing. Semi and full auto. Now, the footage that I did have, a little bit of footage that I did have, it definitely wasn't as snappy as that before on the standard motor. Certainly at least not on the 7.4. That is much, much better. Just even on a 7.4 with the Titan on there, it's making things a lot more efficient. The 11.1 is bordering on frightening now with this sort of level. I'm just putting the selector back on there. Get that in. Screw that in. So we are done and dusted. I hope that's been helpful for you, especially doing the reassembly of everything as well, just to show you what's going off. I hope it's been useful, and I hope it helps you sort of do your own little bits of your own teching work. And tighten that down, and that's it. The teching session is done and dusted. Quite springy, isn't it? So that can go back to the guy that sent it me. I hope that's been useful to you. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and let me know what you thought. And if it's useful to you, I will see you next time. Bye.